Hello Year 9 and welcome to today's lesson. Before we start a knowledge retrieval task about demographics, I'd like you to note down at least two pieces of data we might describe as demographic. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to do that. Two pieces of data that you might describe, I might describe, we might describe as demographic. That wasn't really 30 seconds, but I couldn't wait any longer. These are concrete ideas. These are things like class, location, gender, age, anything else. Basically anything that we can say with absolute certainty, that is the truth. And that is demographic data. You can quantify it. It is there. It isn't generally debated. We're going to do a quick readership profiling task considering demographic data. This is a table of newspaper readership data. It's a little bit out of date because, as you'll see, the Independent is on there, and the Independent doesn't actually exist as a newspaper anymore, it just exists on the web, and the I isn't on there at all. What I'd like you to try and work out is which papers are the most popular with mid to high earners and which papers are most popular with those on middle or lower incomes. And what does this table tell you about the typical reader of the Times, the typical reader of the Mirror? Why do you think this might be? 5 minutes to look at that data and answer those questions. When you're ready, move on to the next slide. Right, so you'll notice that in terms of papers that are popular with mid to high earners, the most popular are the Telegraph, the Guardian, the Independent and the Times, since almost 80%, 90% of their readership is in ABC1. Now remember, ABC1, that is the middle to higher earner demographic. The Star, most of their audience, or a good 80% of their audience, is in C2DE, which is the lower earning demographic. You'll notice that the Mirror, it's about a 40-60 split, the same with the Sun, and the Daily Express is kind of somewhere in the middle. But the Mirror, the Star and the Sun are most popular with those on the mid-lower incomes. So this tells you that the typical reader of the Times is in ABC1, whilst the Mirror has a slightly broader appeal. It has the small majority of its readership are in C2DE, but it does still have a significant ABC1 readership. Now, why do you think this is? Well, primarily it's got to do with the kinds of paper they are. The Times is what we call a broadsheet or a quality. And there's a lot of information in the Times. If you look at the Times, there are quite simply a lot of words. It is full of news, and quite often quite detailed news, quite in-depth news, and quite, it takes quite a while to read, but you get a lot out of it. The Mirror is a tabloid. The tabloids are newspapers like the Mirror, like the Sun, which tend to have less actual news in them. They tend to be more visually driven. The stories tend to be more superficial. They don't tend to be as in-depth, and they tend to be easy to read. The average reading age of the Times is 11, which basically means that the average 11-year-old should be able to understand the stories in the Times. The average reading age of the Mirror is 8. Now, having a newspaper to read which is more of an entertainment, which is easy to read, is a little bit more appealing than a newspaper that takes a lot of time and engagement to read, like the Times. And I think that explains why the Mirror's readership is a little bit broader. Quite simply, it is an easier paper to read. Today, we are carrying on considering our study of audiences. We've already looked at demographics, and now we are going to look at psychographics. And psychographics is a very different way of categorizing audiences, and some might say a somewhat more important way. Before we do that, some quick etymology. Words are useful. We talked about segmentation, but where does the word segment come from? Well, segment comes from the Latin segmentum, which means to cut, and a segment is where we have cut a piece out of something. Demos, as in demographic, and demos is Greek for people. It's where we get democratic from. Psycho is Greek for psyche, which means your spirit, your soul, or your mind. And graphic, interestingly, comes from the Greek word graphos, which means to draw or to write. So this is where we get our key terminology from. Thank you, Greek and Latin. Put the title, please, Psychographic Segmentation. And psychographic segmentation is a significant way of analysing audiences. We're breaking audiences down, not based on the concrete data of demographics, but subjective data. And by that we mean things like your lifestyle, your activities, your interests, your behaviour, and your opinions. None of these things are concrete. None of these things are set in stone. These are all subjective. Similarly, your wants, your needs, and your desires are slightly different depending upon who you are. Nobody will have exactly the same wants, needs, and desires. And I think there is a slight difference between a want and a need. Like, for example, I need a drink, but I want to drink coffee. Someone else might need a drink, and they might want to drink tea. I desire expensive coffee, but I can usually only afford the cheap stuff. Basically, if you imagine it, demographics is like a great big hammer, and psychographics is like a precision tool. You're fine-tuning your media product based on what you think your target audience wants and needs and desires. So that is psychographic segmentation. So in your own words, please, not in my words, in your own words, please rewrite that information to answer the question, define psychographic segmentation. When you've done that, move on to the next slide. Before we move on, I thought I'd mention Young and Rubicam. And Young and Rubicam were quite an influential advertising firm in the 70s, I think, and they came up with something called the 4 C's. And this is a very good way, it's not the only way, but it is a good way of describing what people want. Now, if we were at school, I would print this out and give it to you. I'm not going to ask you to copy it down because it's very easily available on the internet, but it's worth knowing. If you do have access to a printer, there is a version of this that you can print out, but please don't feel that you have to copy it out. Young and Rubicam, their 4 C's are the cross-cultural consumer characteristics. And what they did was they broke down audiences into groups based on what they wanted. And these include aspirers. And aspirers are people who want status within society. And if you are an aspirer, you will be into really expensive brands which will reflect your aspirations. Explorers who like to discover new things and who will go for new, innovative brands, new experiences. Mainstreamers, which is 40% of the population, who will basically go for stuff that have been tried and tested, value for money, follow the crowd. Reformers, who are defined by self-esteem and self-improvement. They're not materialistic, not influenced by status, rather independent and socially aware. Succeeders. Now, succeeders already have high social status. They're what aspirers want to be, and they deserve the best and will consume the best if they can. And they seek control. And the resigned. An old demographic. Basically, you're not going to get anywhere with them because they've got their opinions. They're going to stick with it, and so they are just going to do what they do. I imagine most mainstreamers eventually become resigned. Finally, strugglers. Strugglers, they will basically be lacking kind of anything other than desire for visual impact and physical sensation, and larger consumers of alcohol and junk food. So basically people who are just getting by. That's one way of defining psychographics, the things that people want, and that's the little kind of graphic that you can print out if you want and stick in your book, and it just kind of gives you a bit more of an overview of the 4 C's. Right, so basically what I'd like you to do now is I would like you to deconstruct yourself. I'd like you to work out your demographic and your psychographic. And what would you say your demographics are? Your age should be easy to work out. Your geography should be easy to work out. Can you identify what your particular class of wealth is, your ABC ones? Is there any other demographic data you can give? What about your psychographic data? Now remember, there is a slight difference between wants, needs and desires. We need food, drink, sleep, but how we want to do that is slightly different. How we want to do it might depend upon our desires, it might depend upon our interests. What would you say your demographics are? What would you say your psychographics are? What is the hardest to work out? And this is the main task for today. I'd like you to spend about 20 minutes on this. And this is an analysis of an advert. And it's an advert for Givenchy. It is a fragrance called Gentleman Only. It is being promoted by an actor called Simon Baker. You can just about see his name beneath the feet of the woman in the advert. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to think about the psychographic appeal of this advert. How is this advert using psychographics to appeal to its audience? What does it think its audience wants? What does it think its audience needs? What does it think its audience desires? And how is it doing that? I'd like you to think about, for example, the name of the fragrance. Why is it called Gentleman Only? I'd like you to think about the image. I'd like you to think about the pose of Simon Baker, the clothes he's wearing. I'd like you to think about the model that he's next to, what she's wearing, particularly the positioning of the umbrella, particularly the way she's standing. I'd like you to think about the situation that the character appears to be in and the expression on his face. What story is being told here? I want you to write at least 2 detailed paragraphs using specific examples from the product to explain the psychographic appeal. You could focus, for example, on the character that Simon Baker appears to be playing. What is the psychographic appeal there? You could focus on the relationship between him and the model. What is the psychographic appeal there? There is a larger version of the advert on the next slide, which I'll flick on to in a moment. But I do want you to spend about 20 minutes on this. I want you to write a fairly detailed essay. One of the things I've noticed is a lot of people understand the basics, but they're not giving examples. So you need to give clear examples, in this case, from the advert. If you're not sure about psychographics, remember you can flick back, you can have a look, you can think about Young and Rubicam, you can think about who this is aimed at. Is it aimed at aspirers? Is it aimed at strugglers? When you've written your essay, please photograph your notes. Please make sure that you have uploaded your notes. Please make sure that they are attached, and please make sure that you've clicked the turn in button. Here is the bigger version of the advert. You might want to pause on this, and otherwise that is it.